Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. So I'll just mention it is March 6th, 2024, NFAO SIG 2 automation meeting. Take it from here, Wen. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So I was asked to basically present a little bit on all the stuff that I've been working on, which is probably quite a bit. By the way, should I go in presentation mode or is it okay like this?
Seems clear enough to me.
Yeah. Okay. So there is actually 3 parts in the presentation or in the demo. So I also create some slides to assist a little bit because it's sometimes there's a lot to cover sometimes. So first of all, I have to say is that yeah, without the work we have been doing so far, probably this would not have happened. Now, I think for me, the lesson learned, I have probably I summarized here. I think one of the things that we potentially failed or where we made some let's say shortcuts is we try to do too much, I think, in what we are doing in ports right now, and you will see what I'm proposing to make it more decoupled and pluggable, which also means that the code will be way simpler, because if you look to the ports code itself, I mean, I've been digging into the details, it's complex. So I was trying to simplify that. And then, of course, we have to look at the performance and the scale. And then I am of the opinion that we should, it's always good to iterate. So we have learned a lot of things based on the system that we have. And from that, I'm of the opinion that we should basically go step by step, so iterate and improve, and then take it from there, right? So the first thing that I do, so the first section is focusing on port. So what you see here is I have an implementation of what I call packet server, which is basically a piece of what ports is doing. But in essence, it would only do one thing. So it's only managing what I saw today. What I try to depict on the right-hand side, I think, is the flow chart on what happens inside of port. So you have a package revision, right? That starts with delete, right? So you create a draft, you go to propose, you go to publish, and then you can delete it, or you can go to other options. And there is methods to go to help you go from one stage to another. That's basically what, for me, the essence is of what Porch, or what I call here the package server, is about, right? And only this. All the rest, it's not its business, okay? Now, what you see today in Porch, and I think John mentioned that as well, is today it uses actually Git as for a lot of things. It actually retrieves the package revision information from information that is stored in Git, and then augments it with a bit of information that is stored in a meta CR. So it's very, let's say, challenging to reconcile and stuff like that. So that's also why there is a lot of complexities. What I did is basically, and there was a suggestion to actually move the package revision to a CRD approach. So maybe just for clarification, I try to depict, and I think Tal will go in more details on it, but I think it's important to give a bit of a baseline to everybody. So today in Kubernetes, when we talk about an API, so we have, you can basically classify them in 3 categories. There is the core APIs that Kubernetes comes with out of the box. If you install Kubernetes with a certain release, you get a set of APIs. And this is stored in etcd as a storage backend. So etcd is a storage backend. You have a second mechanism, which most people are familiar with, which is the CRDs, which we have been using. So that's allowing us to extend the Kubernetes API system using custom resource definition, but you also are tied to etcd as a backend. What I did here, and also what Tal showed in TKO, is actually, or you are about to show that, I think, is there is a third method, which is less known, which is, I call it here API server. I think it's known in the Kubernetes system as the aggregated API. Why does it exist? So the API server of Kubernetes has basically a set of attributes. So etcd, for example, to store large objects, it's not very well suited for it, right? So the API server approach allows for basically three things. One is to change the backend if you want, but you don't have to, right? So you could use Git, you could use OCI, you could use BadgerDB, you could use MongoDB, Postgres, anything you want, right? What the current approach of the API system is, you have basically two sub-resources, which is status and scale, I think. Maybe there's others, but these are the two that are known to me. If you want, for example, to have a sub-resource that is specific to your API, you have to use the aggregate API server, for example, to use it. So, for example, why did I not use, as was suggested by John, pure etcd as a CRD for the package revision? Is because today we have an approve object which has certain permissions for certain users, and that are potentially have to be tied to certain people with certain roles, and as a result, you want to have specific permissions for it. So as such, what I did and what I will show in the demo is basically I have the package revision implemented as an API server, but I use etcd as a storage. So this is possible, by the way. So it's not because you use API server that you have to use another backend. You could use it. So it shows a little bit of flexibility. I could change that to another backend if you want. So that's fairly straightforward to do, right? Package revision resource, on the other hand, is implemented. In the demo, I will show Git storage, but I also did other implementations. For example, I have memory and file and BadgerDB, and I didn't do Mongo yet. But yeah, that's not the difficult part. And then I have the repository resource as such, implemented through a regular etcd through CRD, right? So basically, what you'll see as a look and feel is not any different than what we are used to it. The difference is that today, inside of Porch right now, the package revision gets always auto-discovered based on certain tags and references that are being set. I don't do that. You will see that I do discovery, but when you create a package revision, you always have to go through the API server, right? So I have a discovery service that is in the system. It will discover the packages, but I only use it in the demo for the catalog, right? So you will see that I have two repos. So you can still use discovery, but there is only one way to create a package revision, which is through the API service, and there is no other way. And so there is a specific controller that deals with handling the lifecycle of this. And that is happening through what I call the package revision reconciler. So that's the one that deals with this lifecycle to actually handle all the states. Now, it's also very much more simplified than what Porch is doing today, because if you design a system in a way that you want to build multiple backends, you should not design for Git. Right, so Git is one of the things, and then you have to see, okay, how can I use Git in the way that you would also use in Postgres and stuff like that. So what did I do is every package revision has its own branch, right? And so what you do is when you create a package, you create your branch, and you can, for example, clone from another branch, and you can do it, but then the package lives in its branch for itself. Pitch, let me finish this section, if you don't mind, or it's an urgent question that you want to clarify?
No, it's not an urgent question, but it's more context-based. Like, it's more like, when we started off with Porch, it was more about GitOps, right? Sort of a thing.
Yes.
That is why I was thinking, yeah, I can wait, actually.
But for me, it's not so much GitOps so for me, I think Porch, its role is a version backend that you have to do, and Git is one implementation of that, but it's not the only one. So it could be, so for example, Porch supports OCI. I'm not so well, I think, but it has that ability as well. But there is other version backend that you could consider using, right? And so we should not design ourselves towards only Git, is what I'm trying to get to. And that's why I kind of simplified the approach as such. And you see that you actually simplify the code a lot, right? Because if you go from delete to draft, you actually create a branch, and you can do a clone operation. You can basically say, based on a policy, whether you go for the previous revision or you start from scratch and stuff like that. So you have that ability. But then you go to the next stages. It's just status that is being reflected as part of the CRD. And when you go to publish, I just create a tag in Git, and that's it.
Okay.
So it
I still have a
simplifies a lot.
high-level question though. I can ask you later after you're done.
Sure. Okay, yeah. So as such, what you see is that there is two API services that are actually there is a repository as well, and they are using a certain backend depending on how you configure it, but you have the flexibility to do so, right? What I also did is, in the meantime, I wanted to define a generic infrastructure on how to change packages. So I came up with a concept of a package ID. You see already today that so we are using this structure more or less, right? But not completely. So for example, today we tied a repository to a cluster, for example, in this architecture. So what you'll see in my demo is I don't do that anymore. You still could, but you don't have to. So we can manage, so what I call a target within the same repo. So so that's flexibility has been added there. Plus what you see is that typically a package lives in its context. So for example, if you have a name of a package called foo, right, and you want, and foo is used within an infra, but you also want to have a package named foo within the network functions, you clash, right? So you need a way to uniquely identify them. So there's so I call it realm right now, but it's like a domain name or a namespace. So there is a few, so I added a few parameters to make it more flexible on how we identify packages, right? And that's what I use under the hood, but it helped a lot in simplifying the system itself. So if you look to John's roadmap, what he presented yesterday, so what I mainly cover is actually the re-architecture of package revision and that whole framework around that, right? So let's maybe do a demo, right? So I will start from scratch using a new cluster. You can ask questions in the meantime, by the way, so while I'll create it. So I'm always of the opinion you start from zero. So I create a cluster.
So can I ask a question now?
Yes. So one thing before. So I use at the moment config sync, which is not yet relevant at this stage, but you will see later how it becomes relevant. But I will install config sync at the moment. But I'll answer your question. So I'll install config sync and the package server, and then I'll shut up. Yeah. Go ahead, Vish.
So, I mean, in general, when something like this is being changed, right? One of the things, usually looking from the outside in, the question would be like, oh, okay, what use cases or what are we losing? Is there like some sort of it's good to actually have some sort of a 1 or 2 slides. Maybe it's already there.
So
to be able to like,
we are not. So in my mode, we are not losing anything. We are actually gaining. I
see. Okay. Because let me tell you my thinking, right? When I came in, because GitOps was a big thing, right? And I come in, I look at it. What I get sold on is that like, oh, we have a template and the designer is actually creating this template, and now we have a deployer who's using a template and he's going off and trying to customize it, and is able to push it, and is also able to maintain the revisions. And at that moment, at the time, the theme was like, hey, it's all GitOps based. We are actually using GitOps. That's the source of truth. And then we are able to go audit it. We are going to be able to go look at all these things and see when the changes were made and all this. These are the kind of things, at least in my head, maybe I'm looking at it from a narrow perspective, that I look at it and I see that, oh yeah, I see this. Okay, this helps me keep all this package revisions and everything if I'm using GitHub as a source of truth. You're saying we are not still losing any of that stuff. Yeah, correct. So you'll see here. So what I just did, by the way, is I installed so package system here, and package server is the same as Porch, but only the core of Porch. The only thing that it does is basically managing the lifecycle of package revisions. Okay. Okay. So you will not see any difference than what you saw before. The only thing that I did is I basically focused Porch, or that particular piece, to only handle the lifecycle management of package revisions. And that's the only job it has, right? So if you look here, so in the meantime, I attach myself to a repo, right? Which is actually this repo. Okay. No, not this repo. Okay, you're saying basically
network.
the user interface, the interfacing thing for an end user has not changed. It's only the internals has changed.
Yes, correct. So
Okay.
I attached. So what you see is I created kubectl get repositories, right? So I have two repos. I have a catalog, which has catalog information. So my use case, my demo is focused on a creation of a cluster, because I will also demo some of the aspects which NF2 infra. So what the people wanted to have with NF2 infra is I deploy a cluster, you don't say anything else, and the rest will happen for you, right? So like in Capi, for example, today what we do is we install, a human has to basically identify, okay, this is depending on this, and this is depending on that, and this is depending on this, and this is depending on that. And if you do the right thing, we'll get it right, right? What you see in the demo, so the second part of the demo is you no longer have to do that. So I just have, so what you see here as part of the catalog, and you see the interface is almost the same as what you have before, right? I just see what I did is the name, I changed a little bit because you get this package identity information, but you still have a repo, you have a package, you have a revision, you have a workspace, and you have a lifecycle, right? Nothing changed, right? And you have package revision resources based on this. Now, the difference here is that in order to get to this information, I have what I call a discovery service that basically and the way it's implemented right now is I only use it for catalogs because I think catalogs are typically prepared ahead of time. So you could create the package revisions based on the discovery, but everything that package revision is about is created through the API server. And it's not like Porch does today. It basically goes to Git and figures stuff out. Everything is through the API server. There is there's only one way, okay? But what you see here is you get all the capabilities, for example, of you want to do a watch, right? I want to watch all my resources. I want to have a field selector, right? So for example, I want to only look at packages with, so my package ID is what I call it, right? Package ID dot package. And I want to know copy kind, right? So today, for example, you cannot do that in our system. So now you can do filters based on objects that are in the spec and stuff like that. So you get the full, what I call the full benefit of the API system of Kubernetes, right? And with a backend that is of your choice, right? So far, what I just wanted to show is it's still the same. As a user, you will not see anything different. The implementation that is behind has changed. Okay, and it's simplified a lot, and my view is with simplification comes a lot of robustness typically, and as a result, you get more robust code, and it's going to be more scalable and what have you, right? So that's the starting point, so the baseline, right? So it's fairly straightforward. So what I implemented actually is what John in his discussion item identified as moving the package revision as a CRD. I didn't do a full CRD. I still used the API service, but I have used, so it's still etcd based at the moment, but I use the API service because we wanted to assign the approval certain permissions that not everybody is entitled for, and that's why I did that change. Okay, so far, nothing new, but the implementation at the back is very different at the moment, right? The second thing that I wanted to highlight is that today we have a very tight coupling of Porch towards KPT and towards, so anything we do basically. And so I believed, for example, if one of the questions that we have in NF2 infra was, I wanted to, and you will see that in the demo ASAP, is I want to basically, as you see in this slide here, I want to create a cluster. And I have these variations that I wanted to assign, right? But this cluster is, for example, is a package. So I create a package variant. And so this package variant is tied to an upstream, like you don't see a change from what you have right now. Okay, Tal, one moment, I'll show in a bit. And then downstream, I want to put it here. So very similar to what you saw, what we are doing with package variants today. And then I give it context in which I want to deploy this cluster with this name, and I want to give it in this location, and I want to install version X, and I want to have control plane redundancy or not. So you have a set of choices that you have. Plus, you have the ability to provide actors on those on that thing that will do something for you, right? So in other words, you have the ability to flexibly assign certain actors that act upon a specific role to process this variant or this package revision that will be created. And that will then result in the package revision that will be deployed at a given, for a given cluster, if you will. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a meta question. Is this code for the demo a fork from Porch? Do you maintain a fork that we could take a look at, or? No,
I mean, I have looked at the code of Porch, but the implementation is completely from scratch, basically.
Okay.
I used a few things in Porch, but code is very different.
Yeah, the Porch code is there's a lot. But is it something we can take a look at, or do you have it?
Yeah, I will share the code after this. Yes, correct. Yeah, I will share.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah. Thanks, Wim. One clarification comment on maybe on slide 11, where you were showing the example manifests.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the right-hand side picture, you have this readiness gates. So these are, if I understood it correctly, it's more as the readiness steps, right? What actually has to be provisioned, or the add-ons that needs to be configured once the cluster has been created, and then as a response, yes, now the cluster is ready as per the requirements coming in for the NF to be deployed. Is that the correct understanding?
So I will not show that yet, but it's the same approach, right? So in other words, so when we did NF to infra, our objective was always, I'm showing the cluster right now because I'm doing the NF as we speak, right? But the principle is the same. So you basically start from a resource that you want to instantiate, okay? And that resource right now is this. So this is the package. So this is my workload cluster. So in ORAN, I think you call this a template, right? So I want to install this template, and I want to deploy it. So this is, and it's called my edge node 1, right? And I want to deploy it because in Nevio it's deployed on the management cluster.
Yeah. Sorry.
Say again?
I think it's more as the template artifact in ORAN context.
Correct. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Correct. So this is the template that you refer to, right? And then you say, I want to instantiate it here, right? And in order to do so, I want you to handle these actions onto that. And here is some additional context that I'll give you to do that, right? So for example, I want you to deploy, because this catalog has a provision to say, you can select me a version, right? So you can call, this is the API of that package here, that basically says, I allow you to tell me which version you want, or how much control plane redundancy. So we could expose a set of attributes here, right? So I call it a claim for a cluster, which we would define inside of Nevio. And I built here an example. So for the cluster package, you have a claim for clusters that identify a set of attributes. And based on those attributes, they will be used when we deploy this package, when all these steps are happening. Then we will use these attributes to actually parameterize those templates that were built here through that deployment cycle, right? So that's basically what I will show. Is that clarifying?
Yeah, partially. I mean, Then if I recall the NF2 infra, I think we had some discussions long ago around, and some of the discussions were pointing to the networking requirements.
Also,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah, correct. So I'm showing the very base bone at the moment, right? So, but you will see the framework is, you could do anything with it, right? Because you could actually use it purely for software installation and figuring out all the dependencies on the fly. It's not tied to just the infrastructure as such. But let me finish this, Alok, and maybe let's ask the questions afterwards, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah.
So what I was trying, so one of the things is, and I think Tal is also a big fan of it, is like pluggability and extendability, right? So, and I then of the approach that we should divide and conquer. So in other words, each of these bubbles that you see is an actor that is acting on a certain activity for that given package, right? So one is, of course, the variant, the package variant. It does the variation of the package based, so he is the one that basically gets this as a starting point, right? So he creates a variant of, he actually creates a package revision with this context, similar to what happens today, no difference. The second thing that is happening actually, and this is a service that this is actually the most important point for NF2 infra. The nice thing, and here is, we are starting to leverage the full benefit of KRM in my view. What you see is that if you look to a package, and maybe I'll show to this slide, there are certain packages that actually expose an API. So for example, they have CRDs or they have API services in them. So in other words, they are the owner of a particular resource, right? So for example, if I need a certificate and I have a package for Cert Manager, which you will see, which is in the demo, actually, if someone asks for a cert from the copy packages, I know that I'm depending on the Cert Manager package, right? So what the discovery does, it actually figures out when you attach your packages to the repos, like I did here, it is analyzing the data and figuring out all the dependencies between these packages as a service, right? So that's what it's doing. It just figures out who is depending on what, and that's about it, right? And someone will use that in a bit. The scheduler is the one that actually consumes that data. And so what you will see in the demo, for example, is when I instantiate my template, which is which refers to this package, you see that the kind, and this is actually what we do today in Nephew, this is depending on templates, and the templates depends on these packages, and these packages depend on core, and core depend on Cert Manager. And so I didn't configure anything, right? So there's nothing that I did so far. That discovery service here figured it out for us. And he provides this as information. At the moment, I store it in memory, so we have to discuss where we would store that and stuff like that. So I make it available. At the moment, the scheduler is using it, because what is happening when the package variant instantiates the package, the scheduler will go and figure out what are all my dependencies that I need to be depending upon, and are they already installed or not? And if so, he selects a version or a revision based on a policy, right? So at the moment it's latest if it's not installed. And so it will figure out all of its stuff, and he will then schedule the dependencies, and then there is people that are going to act upon it, right? So I'm of the opinion that if you divide each of these roles into specific entities, the code itself is simpler and focused on the job that they are supposed to be doing, right? So that's the job of the scheduler, is actually he uses the dependencies that this guy figured out, and he will, based on any package that you instantiate, figures out who is depending on what, and he will then take care of that, and you will see that in action in a bit, right? The next one is what I call I called it processor. I didn't call it specialized. Again, the name is up for debate. This one is actually what we do today, specialization. And I wanted to build it in such a way that whether you use kept or other things. So I will show a demo with Kform, which I think is a bit more powerful than kept and less depending on code writing and stuff like that. So in the demo, I use Kform as it, but it's built in such a way that you can decide for yourself whether which technology you want to pick, right? Because today we are very tied to, we are very tied to kept, and I also wanted to break that if you want, right? So actually, this is a duplicate, right? No, this should have been the approval. Sorry, I made a typo. So we have the approval reconciler, as you know today. So it's very much the same. But because there is very clear input and output criteria, you'll see that he will approve immediately. So there's no such thing as waiting for waiting for 1 minute and stuff like that, because the framework is built using that readiness gates and conditions to actually act upon in a flexible way. And then in the last step, I have the installer reconciler. At the moment, this is only implemented with config sync, but the idea, again, it's like we said before, if people want to use Argo or we want to use Flux, we just have to change the implementation of this person, and we could do that at installation time or something like that, right? And then we already saw, which I did not implement, but for example, Subash wanted to have a validator reconciler, right? So he wants to assume that this is processed. Is this in line with security and policy compliance and stuff like that? We also discussed yesterday in security an identity provider that assigns identity to certain entities. These are all, you could plug and play these things into it as we believe. So that's kind of a little bit what this is about. Also, what I did, by the way, is you guys know that we have today, deleting a package that was installed is nearly impossible, right? So I also took then the liberty to take care of that, right? So today, if you look to the implementation that you see, is that the config sync usage is no longer based on main, but we specify the explicit repo and branch and directory. So in other words, now you get an installation on a per package basis. So that means that you can delete easily the whole thing without any problem, right? So yeah, so let's maybe show this thing in action, right? Then it might be simple. So this is actually what I will implement, okay? So what you see when I implement, so I say, I want to use a cluster with this template of version 3, and I want to deploy it here. So here you see already the target. So for example, this I use in the Git implementation. I use it as a directory. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, can you please increase the font if it is okay for this IDE?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is it better?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I also say which are the readiness gates that I want to have, and I also provide some context, right? So I basically say, I want this cluster with this. Yeah. Now this thing is a bit slow. Yeah, I have my IDE is a bit. I have too many things open, but you. Yeah, so you can basically parameterize or give context to this, right? To say, okay, I want this. I also have a package dependency that you can explicitly specify if you have to say, for example, our templates, you have an explicit dependency or not. So you can also add that into your context if you want, right? So what I will do is I will basically instantiate, because yeah, I want to instantiate this, and then what you will see is that the system takes care of all the dependencies that this package is depending upon. I didn't do anything for that, right? So the controller that you saw before are taking care of that. Apply -f, package variants. Yeah, that's it. So there is, yeah, I did that. So what is now happening? So you see the system in action. So the system is, so the scheduler basically figures out what are all my dependencies, right? It will see, okay, the cert manager. So if you go back, so the cert manager was the one with the first dependency, right? So if you look to this, so it will deploy this. Once it is approved, it assigns a version to it, right? And then the next thing is going to happen. So now copy, because this was installed with a certain version, now copy core is being installed, right? It's also going through the same process. So gets installed, gets specialized, gets approved, will it be assigned to revision, right? Then you see here, now the three things in parallel are going to happen. So based on this chart, you see that copy Docker, control plane, and Bootstrap can now be installed because they are no longer depending on anything else. They are just depending on this, and this is installed. So they are going to be installed, and so on and so forth, right? So the system, that was the job of NF2 Infra. We had to be able to flexibly and dynamically be able to figure out the dependencies we had between each other, with the objective that when you deploy an object of X, all its dependencies. So I think of it right now, even in our deployment. And so today, this is all happening through a script that Victor or other people made, right? And they had to figure out manually which are all the packages that are needed to be installed. In the NF today, it is simple, right? Because it's just depending on the NF deployment CRD. But think about the case where a network function is dependent on Multus. So today we install Multus by default. You have a set of host requirements, you have a set of kernel modules you have to deploy, and so on and so forth. All of this will be figured out for you, right? So the system is built in such a way that, and it's done at the moment, right? So you see that everything is installed, approved, and ready to basically go. That is one thing. I'd use the latest. So if you look at kubectl get bots, right? And I forgot to show that in the beginning because it was an empty cluster. None of these things were deployed, right? You see in the meantime, all of these things are happily running. You see all the systems being installed, Cert Manager, the Bootstrap system, all of that ready to roll without us having to do basically anything. So it's completely automated as such, right? Yeah. So any questions on this? So you see also all the root sync. So for example, root sync -A, you see all of these are being automatically consumed, and config sync is the one that basically does the installation. Yeah, Tal, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say this is great. I think the idea of this is the proper evolution of Porch, dividing it into all these functions, reconciliations that can happen separately. It will definitely simplify the code base. I still think it's just far too many steps. I think we have lots of different components, right? So I think something can be done. You know, in my proposal, I tried to simplify things, I think, a lot. You know, I just have 3 components, 2 really, if you think about all these blue boxes that you put here. That said, I think this is, I would call this a necessary cleanup of Porch that will make it easier to evolve these components separately. You know, my proposal is more radical. You know, I do want to change the basic architecture, but yeah, thank you for this. I think that this also, I think, makes it much easier to understand how Porch works.
Yes, yeah, correct, yeah. Isti? Isti, are you on mute?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So okay. I also like the idea of splitting Porch into multiple reconcilers. My question is about the processor reconciler. So that is, that's supposed to be the specializer. That we have the specializer. So now the specialized in the current state, the specializer is not part of Porch, and it is very similar to Kubernetes controllers. Multiple independent small specializers can watch and act on a single package or even on the same resource in the same package. I think that is a value. Does it have a place?
Yes, and you will see. So I did not highlight. So that's my next section, right? So I'm having a proposal to also on this in particular, but I didn't want to make. I wanted to make people wanted to make a framework by which people have the choice to use whatever they want. I didn't want to imply it has to be this or that or that. And you will see that there will be some advantage or one of the other, but you have the ability. So if you want to basically do a divide and conquer here, and actually Kform is a way to do divide and conquer, by the way, I will show in a bit. Mm-hmm. So you actually can decouple this processing pipeline into pieces, and they all do like I did here. So I have a module that does, for example, IP allocations. Like I have a module that does VLAN allocations, and you can reuse that module in other pipelines, right? So the framework of Kform is like that you can build these reusable modules that each will be instantiated independently and can be managed or even lifecycled independently of the rest of the system. So Kform, as an implementation of this, is doing that. I'm not saying that that people have to use it, but Kform as an implementation does the divide and conquer completely.
Okay, so is it right now one reconciler, and I can give multiple inputs for that one reconciler, or do I still have the option to write my own reconciler here and somehow
yes, so each of these so each of these are basically replaceable, right? So I don't basically demand you to use this or that or that. So each of these things are replaceable. The only dependency you have is this, but this code is kind of 10 lines. So you probably have to say when you're done.
Yes, I understand that, and that is fine. Okay, okay, thank you.
Time check. We have 15 minutes left. I want to make sure, Wim, that you have time to finish and answer questions. So up to you.
Bala, you want to? Is it urgent or we wait?
Yeah, I think it's the similar lines of Isti. It's just a continuation of the question. Probably we can just discuss it now. Probably it's in the same context, actually. If you go back to the diagram. So I had a very similar question to what Isti asked. So essentially we could do pipelining just like the way we do, right? Using the processor controller, and then we can do a plug and play.
Yeah, correct.
So
that's the idea for me. Any of these things, the approval, you probably don't want to replace, right?
Yes.
Because that's the scheduler. Maybe you want to have another algorithm, because at the moment it's kind of, I call it peel the onion, right? So you go, that's how it works, right? So I peel this one and this, but you could have other implementations of it, right? So I didn't want to, I just wanted to do an implementation to show what is possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have opinion. The last two that you had, right? Package validator, reconciler, package, and I think they should be part of the processor. Is my same pipeline?
Yeah, but they can be decoupled, right? So, for example, and that's again a choice of implementation. I think, Bala. For example, if you say that you want the third party to basically focus on compliance of the package, then you probably don't want to merge it, right? So
got it.
I wanted to give you the choice.
Got it. You could do it.
By the way, if you want to have 5 other pieces, you can, right? Or you want to combine, like Tal said, you can do as well, right? I don't want to, because the way that these tags are that I put here, it's basically a label, right? So you can come up with your own.
Got it. Okay, cool.
You see, so that's the pluggability that this framework or that this implementation has. So you could basically say, I want just one thing and everything in one, right? Be my guest, right? I don't want to tell you how you should do the thing.
Awesome, cool. Thank you so much, Wim. I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now that is the last part of it. So this is actually actually, if you look, I didn't show it because the beauty of the system is that it goes completely automatic, right? But if you look, each of these pipelines, so the processor, or actually I implemented Kform in it. So the Kform, so the reason why it's called form at the end is because it's inspired by Terraform as a whole, right? But the difference is it's only KRM based, and so there is nothing like that. And why did I not use Terraform? Is because they have their own schemas, and their own schemas is not really the KRM base, so you actually change a lot of things. the big advantage of the system, I think, is of Kform as a tool is both client side and server side. So you will see here. So for example, I can, if you look at Kform, I actually have here. Oh, where's my here? So I will show you very simple the system, right? But it's also, so this is a client side implementation, right? So you just say, I apply this example, this input, and you get an output, right? So so you could actually test, so similar to how we use KEP today, you could test client side as well as server side. So when you saw the steps that were happening during the scheduling and the thing, actually I use Kform as a server side technology, but you can use it as a developer on your own as well, right? So that is, I think, a big bonus that you get, and KEP has some of that capabilities as well. But I don't believe it's as flexible today as Kform is, right? Now, what does Kform do as its base? It's kind of the same thing as a function, right? So you have an input, and it has to determine an output, right? Based on some logic. And the way it does it, it actually uses what we call these expressions, right? But basically, it has building blocks that have a certain role. And this role is going to act upon something, and based on the definition on how you define it, you basically will be able to change the output that you want to render to, right? So what I basically did when I gave the input with this version and this site and stuff like that, each of these parameters were used to basically express, and through expression language, to change values and to manipulate it, right? If you look to what we did in specialization, that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. What it also does, by the way, so it has, and actually the ones that I use are the same as Terraform, by the way. So output is a Terraform object, so they call them block types. We have inputs, and so input can have either defaults, but can also have dynamic input. So I'll take your question in a bit, Steve, if you don't mind, right? And then it also has a concept of what they call data, list, and resource, right? Which is actually implemented through providers, right? So we have a provider plugin that takes data is kind of in the Kubernetes API as a get. List is a list. And that doesn't exist. A list doesn't exist in Terraform, so I added that. And then resource is basically you apply a resource to the cluster, right? So these are attributes that you use. And so this is implemented through a provider plugin. So this is actually, like Isti was asking, can I do divide and conquer? Yes. So the provider plugin is an entity. It's a process, can be implemented as a pod or a process as you want, that is going to execute upon this, and that will act upon a real API system that it's interacting with. And you can configure the parameters on the permissions that you have on that API system. And as a result, you have the ability to interact also with external systems. Now, the beauty over Terraform, because we focused on 100% KRM, is that I actually, with one provider, I can do every use case, right? Now, that is true if everything is KRM. So we will also live in a world where not everything is KRM. So you could, so how can you make this system pluggable and extensible? You could either use a controller, as Steve was saying, right, which implements the KRM, or you could use a provider that is specific to your use case. And providers are implemented in the similar way as Terraform providers are implemented, and then you just consume them in your system, right? And then we use, so I use expression language. So if you look to the implementation that is under the hood of Kform, so it renders a DAG. So it's based on these objects that you configure, it will render the dependencies. So it creates a DAG, and then it executes each of these entities independently as such, right? And so you have expressions which is implemented using self functions, which is basically what John was also suggesting as a capability, and which is actually used today in Kubernetes today for mutation and validation webhooks, instead of validation and mutation webhooks. And there is conditionals, there is iterators. And the other nice thing that we have is we have a concept of mixing. So in other words, I was saying, I want to have a module that does IP allocation. So it basically, you can mix in that module, and it then takes care of IP allocation and provides the output to the previous thing. So you can basically chain these modules, and they all execute independently, basically similar to how our specialization is executing. So they are all independent modules that that act upon it, right? So it kind of covers a lot of things with as a local no-code approach. But Isti, please go ahead. In the meantime, I'm preparing some basic principles for you to show what Kform is about. Yeah, go ahead, Isti.
Okay, I was asking, I wanted to ask after this, so perfect. I understand, if I understand correctly, the goal is to replace KRM functions. However, can it be
not to replace? So this is
as one KRM function. Okay, then.
Yes, yeah.
So the actual question is, can we implement a KRM function that is called Kform substitution evaluator? That that is 100%. Good. So basically, if we have an executor, like let's call it this way, that can execute KRM functions, it is very easy to plug in these Kform substitution systems. Because perfect.
100%. So that's actually what I did, Isti, right? So I started, so my first implementation was client-side, like you see here, right? But what I did for the package, so if you look into my slides on the, here, this implementation here, it is part of the controller. So the controller runs it, right? So the reconciler runs it, and it calls Kform, and Kform does the rest. You see?
Yeah, that is exactly my. That is exactly where I am coming from. So if that processor would be still based on, just assume that we would still based on KRM functions, it wouldn't be a problem. We could have a KRM function that is this Kform evaluator, and whoever wants to use this can just call this. Maybe not just the single one, but as a part of a pipeline. Okay, I have another question that is more broad. Maybe we won't have time for this, but we have this principle that we followed so far in config as data, that we want to separate the code from the configuration data. So the code that, and I have a feeling that now we are mixing again back together. So
not
the two.
Wait, so there is a bit of a mix. That's correct. It's not 100% separated, but it's, you see, there is some mix, right? But the benefit is that you don't have to write code. So the way it is mutated is through expressions.
Okay.
Right?
So I always thought that the problem is not by defining the config by code, but the real problem is when the config is not parsable and you cannot write a function that is that can automatically modify it. So if we keep that, for example, if the YAML file is still a valid YAML file, and I can still write a manipulator that in the revision field overwrites whatever is there and replaces with the string apple, if I can do that, then it is okay. So that I have less.
That's what it does. Yeah, that's what it does. So for example,
I have the feeling, yes, that it's still true. Yes.
Yeah, it's still true. Yeah. So it's exactly like you said. So it basically, so input.context is my input variable, right? So there is a notation. By the way, this is Terraform. I didn't change anything there. And it basically takes input.context, which is a default. So this is my default, but I gave it this thing, right? So you could change the content of it using the input variable. So what you saw here is that if I don't give any input, right, I will take the default. See, so it renders V1, right? Whereas here it renders V3. You see, so the default was V3, and the other one was V1, and the other one was V3. So, and you can do iterators. You can do. I'm probably running out of time, right? Which was I was expecting, but you could do conditional statements. You could do. You can build expressions basically per object, right? That basically renders something. For example, this one basically gives me 10,
yes,
depending on the input, gives me 10 objects of this this thing here, right? So it says context if you say how many, and depending, oh no, this one is a conditional. So if attachment type is VLAN, I will do this. If not, I don't even render this, right? So I don't even touch the code here, right? So this, if I would have not changed the value of this, you would see the real thing, but you get 10 things, and then count.index is the variable that you use to substitute it. So it's basically how very similar to how Ansible and Terraform.
Okay, and okay, we should continue this, I think, because now I would argue that we are actually putting code, replacing one templating mechanism with another. So let's be careful on that. Yes. However, I understand the idea. Sorry.
The difference I think I see is that in CAP, a lot of things are implicit, right? So a lot of stuff happens for you. And the feedback that I'm getting from a lot of people, it's not very clear, right? That's what is happening. Here you actually see straight into the system what is happening. And that I think is a benefit. But okay, everybody has its own thing. I'm just saying this is a way. I'm not saying that's the only way. Okay.
Okay. I even agree that this is more readable, for example, much more readable than what we have. I still have to think through all the consequences.
Yeah, I had to see.
But I leave it, I think.
Yeah.
Say again, Bala?
I had to see the recording again. A lot of concepts. By the way, Wim, did you invent K-form?
I think I would not say I invent, but yeah, I mean, I was myself basically, right? Okay. But I would say that it was inspired very much by Terraform. So Terraform is actually, I don't think I did an invention. I just mapped it to KRM.
Okay, cool, awesome. Great job. Yeah, I'm looking forward. Is there any link that you can provide? We can take a look.
I'm going to document because we are also looking at this for the SDK, right? So we are looking at this to use in the SDK thing. So I will, first share the code and also document all of this stuff so that you have a better view of the system. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. And will that be hosted under NFUI too, or it will be hosted separately?
Yeah, we can discuss. I have to figure out within the company on what happens, right? But yeah.
Cool. By the way, thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Any more questions or?
We are at
thank
time.
you. Thank you, Wim. It's very impressive, and I think we are going to the right direction. So.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, would like a hands-on workshop. Like Bala said, there's a lot of concepts, hands-on workshop, because we need to digest some of this, I mean, I see you as one of those people who understands Porch a lot more better than, at least, I mean, of course, than me, in the sense like you have been playing with it for such a long time. So like having like a hands-on workshop would actually help understand some of these things, or any of these new things that come in. To digest it.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. And I think it's always good to start from the base, right? So I'm not so long busy with Porch, by the way, less than a month, by the way, Vish. But I never looked in depth to the code, but
because I was thinking that I should start getting involved in the Porch thing, because I had seen that. I mean, suddenly I see that there was new things coming along. So, and also in general, for somebody. Having some sort of a material out there, like saying, hey, these are calling out bulleted list of things, what this improves upon, it'll help us so that we can look at it and then start comparing it.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Victor?
Yes, sorry, I know that we are running out of time, but it's just a quick question. Thanks a lot for the presentation and for the demo as well. So the question is regarding the impact. I know that you mentioned that we are going to keep multiple things. Just regarding how much do you think that it is going to impact to use this particular approach? Do we need to refactor everything and we have to start from scratch, or like
no,
not very radical?
So the package. So the thing is, if you look to this, what has to do if we go with this approach, right? You have to, of course, the Porch implementation changed, but I didn't really much change the API. It's more or less the same, right? So that didn't change. If we want to be independent of kept, right, there will be some changes into the package itself, right? That's how they are rendered, but also to the advantage, in my view, right? Take the catalog, right, that I was showing today. To basically take Cert Manager, right? We have to create a kept package and stuff like that. I just use the manifest of Cert Manager out of the box. I didn't change anything. You see, it makes it even simpler to how we are depending on other things, right? So I didn't. So these are all benefits we are going to get from it, because for example, Kform as a base, or even the process as a base, is 100% KRM. So in other words, if I want to use Multus, why would I have to do something to change Multus? Because I don't even own that software, right? So it basically takes it as is. I don't change anything, and that should be the baseline on how things start, right? And these are all benefits we are getting. For example, if you want to do another version of Multus, we need to, today we did it manually, right? But all these tools, we don't even have to do anymore. All disappears.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about next steps. So as I pointed out, I think this is a necessary cleanup of Porch. However, this is a huge undertaking to reorganize and refactor Porch's code base to work like this. So that's why I'm very interested to see like
the code. Yeah, I will share the code as ASAP. Yeah, I'll share the code ASAP.
And you know, general hanging over everything here is, you know, what our future is with Porch if we really want to invest in this, because this will be a lot of work. I think it's necessary, right? If we continue using Porch, we do have to clean up the code base a lot. and I agree with this kind of refactoring. It would be a lot of work, right? So we need to, yeah, we have some general things to think about and maybe evaluate you know, other solutions, etc., and think about this. But I will suggest, you know, ONES coming up, that could be a good place for a workshop for people to kind of come together and brainstorm. We had some good sessions like that in the past where we kind of in person met with a whiteboard and kind of looked at different ideas. I would be in favor of doing this. You know, I'm deep in the Porch code base, so I could definitely help in doing this, but I can tell you this will be a lot of work, you know, and testing everything and changes and how we do this incrementally or not incrementally. Maybe just the best way is to do it all at once with kind of like a huge new code base, right? So,
but for example, Tal, the thing that I did, for example, if you use Git as a backend, right? The fact that there is a few decisions that I made so far, right? That have to be discussed, of course. But for example, I made a decision to keep a package within a branch and just tag it, right? The simplification you have in the code of Porch is huge, because they have all these steps with proposed, deletion proposed. They have all kinds of tags, and the way they handle all that state, it's all gone. So it's simple. So if you look at yeah, if you look at the code itself, it simplifies a lot. If you look to my code of the Git interaction, it's very simple. Because I was of the opinion that, okay, it's not, so packages needs to evolve, right? But once you are it's like, I see it as once you start the package, you create a context, right, for yourself. What is that context in Git? It's a branch, basically. And then you iterate. At some point, some of these things become a revision, but some things don't, right? And what you typically want to have is, okay, you want to have a starting point of something, right? You can either go from another revision and then move ahead, or you start from scratch, right? So this is typically the two things that you have. So if we believe that that's okay, you also simplify a lot.
Yeah,
because I'm of the opinion that
yeah,
a package on itself is having its own life cycle, you see? And so by doing those type of things, it's not because we store them all in one repo that we have to create a huge dependency between all of them. In my view, a package on itself is an entity that has its own life cycle.
That's true. I would have envisioned a simpler life cycle myself, but than the one Porch has right now, you know,
okay.
So many.
That's also for debate. That's for debate as well, because
exactly. But I guess I wanted to point out that, you know, yes, there's evolution, incremental evolution, but there's also the problem of sunk costs, right? You know, the amount of work we invest, is it an investment for the future? And, you know, those are the big questions kind of that are hanging out over this, right? So evolution can be hard. Refactoring is very hard. You know, so many projects go through this. At some point you say, okay, are we just releasing a 2.0 version of this, which is a major refactor, or are we doing incremental refactors? There are pros and cons to each approach, right? So those are kind of the things we have to consider. I don't have an answer to that. I'm just kind of posing.
That's correct. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, it's fair. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So thanks a lot.
If there's any discussion on this, can we have GitHub discussion, please? That'll be great.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're way over time, so just thank you so much, Wim, for this. This is a step forward in our discussion, and we still have a lot of items on the agenda that keep being pushed forward. So hopefully, let's try next week to really hammer some of the long-standing things that have been delayed. And this discussion about Porch in the future, I think, is kind of ongoing. Yeah, so we'll discuss it. And about my session for how to build API servers, I'll schedule it separately. It won't. I don't want to take time from the main meeting. So we'll discuss on Slack when to schedule that. And for people interested in going very deep, you know, the lower level for all of this is how do you build an API server? And I'll try to clarify that as much as I can. To me, it's pretty clear right now, but boy, was it a journey. It is not trivial at all. So I'll try to share my my experiences with you and hopefully help you understand how you build something like that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for staying over time, those who could, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Tal.
All right.
Thank you, Wim.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Wim.
Have a good one, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.